engage with the Department of Health and birth certificates. So they're like, okay, we're going to start processing and verifying citizenship. Of 200,000 people? He offered little more than speculation, saying that if we release this information, there's going to be violence or harassment, and he was just going off national statistics.
MVD now tells us the data had the following loopholes. All pre-1996 driver's license holders were also coded as citizens, even though some were not.
Victory in Arizona from America First Legal. We had a big problem with a giant bucket of voters in Arizona who were registered voters, but the problem is they didn't have any proof of citizenship on file. And this is one of many glitches that we've seen in 2024, this election cycle, in addition to the glitch from Jenna Griswold posting the passwords online, in addition to Jocelyn Benson of Michigan, revealing to us all that there's a glitch in the Dominion system that is nationwide, that impacts disability terminals that are used by people who have trouble using other terminals. So there are problems. They are deploying people to go solve these problems. They're obfuscating and hiding material from us, but America First Legal got a nice victory in the state of Arizona, and we'll read through the order. But here is the issue. It includes a big bucket of questionable voters, 218,000 people. Okay, that is a lot. And today, a few days ago, earlier in the week, the Superior Court in Arizona issued the ruling. Now, here's the problem. 218,000 individuals were registered to vote, and they didn't have proof of citizenship on file. That is a ton, okay? In 2020, the margin in Arizona was about 11,000 votes. This is a huge bucket, absolutely dispositive, meaning you might have easily, theoretically, 11,000 people who are non-citizens or are problematic voters who should not be on the list. Earlier this month, America First Legal sued, and now we've got an order. Fontes testified that his office only possesses a partial list of 98,000 of the 218,000 affected individuals because the MVD hasn't even given him a complete list. However, the court found that Fontes provided inconsistent testimony, and so they're very happy about it. Here is the full decision in Arizona. You can see Strong Communities Foundation versus the Arizona Department of State election litigation in the state of Arizona. Here's what the judge says out of our Superior Court, telling us, all right, look, on October 28th, just a few short days ago, the court held an evidentiary hearing and trial on the merits, and we had testimony presented there. We played some of it here. The court received the evidence, heard the arguments, and observed the demeanor of the witnesses. Now, the court has since reviewed and considered the evidence and issues these findings of facts. Now, as the court admonished the parties at the hearing, the only issue for this court is to decide whether the records that the plaintiff, we'll call them the Republicans, whether they requested must be released pursuant to public record law. Now, despite the political undertones, this is simply a public records case. That's it. Saying Strong Communities for Arizona is a nonprofit, and what they're looking for is they filed a request back in September, so not recently, with the Arizona Secretary of State's office. They said, hey, we need this info. What do you need? A subset of the statewide voter registration database. We have a big database. It's called the VRDB that contains only those registered who are active and inactive voters that have been identified by your office, Democrat Secretary of State, as registrants who, quote, first obtained their Arizona driver's license before 1996 and then were issued a duplicate replacement before registering to vote sometime after 2004, that may be moved from the full ballot to a federal-only registration list if the recorder's anticipated lawsuit is successful. Okay, so a lot happening here in that paragraph. So in other words, the PRR, which is the public records request, sought a complete list of voters affected by a glitch. Okay, a very convenient glitch they just discovered between the systems of the MVD and the Arizona Secretary of State's office, which is Richard's office, whereby some voters had been, quote, automatically but incorrectly understood by the voter registrations to have provided documentary proof of citizenship. So the idea being, when you get a license, they check your citizenship status in order to get that license. Then you get a driver's license number, your citizenship has been checked. Then we take that, go register to vote. They say on our registration to vote, hey, what do we need from you? Oh, your driver's license number. Oh, great. Driver's license number is valid. That means the MVD is checked, that you're a citizen, because they did the checking, so we don't have to do the checking at the Secretary of State's office. Well, apparently, the MVD was not checking people from a big bucket of votes. It looks like from 1996, maybe all the way to 2004. They're like, well, we didn't actually check that. We thought you were checking that. They're like, no. So we're calling these people the affected voters. Now, on September 24th, Adrian Fontes, our Secretary of State, Arizona's Jenna Griswold, notified EZAZ through lawyers that the public records request would not be fulfilled before the election. Sorry, we're not going to give you those those names so you can check to see if they're citizens or anything. Why? Well, why won't you give them to us? Safety of voters. What? Safety? Well, yeah, if we give you like 100,000 names, like somebody on that list might be threatened or something, so we're not going to give you the names because there's a bunch of people on there. Well, we have to check to see if they're citizens or not, to see how bad the list is, to see how many people are there, and whether they're voting. So you have to release the names to us. They said, no, we can't. It's a safety problem. Okay, well, just release it to us under seal. Well, no, we're also concerned about the accuracy of the list. What do you mean? The accuracy? It's either accurate or not. Like, just give us the list. Well, it might not be right. What? The letter neither invoked that law or that law as the reason for withholding any of this. And so on September 26, the Republicans were notified about the record's request. They got a notification through the portal. They said, your record request, guess what? Closed. Don't ask again. The message was added to their FOIA request, their record request. It said, dear Republicans, we're writing to inform you that our response was released before and your request has now been closed. So Marissa Hamilton, president of EasyAZ.org, testified that after both receiving the letter and the notification, she understood that to mean that her request was denied. And so the court came out and they found that the letter of September 24th and the closure was a denial. So they said, you're not getting it, it's closed, so that was a denial. So then on October 2nd, they filed a lawsuit. They said, how dare you deny us? This was in response to Stephen Richer, who sued Adrian Fontes, so fake Republican suing an ultra Democrat, because they're on the same team. Let's not mince words on that. They both hate Trump and Republicans. The recorder's action sought to prevent a number of estimated, at the time, 98,000 voters from voting. So wait a minute, we don't know who those are. So Stephen Richer said, don't let them vote. Move them to federal-only voters. So they say that he had been accurately recorded. These 98,000 actually had proof of citizenship, and there was just a system flaw. So then what happened is Richer and Fontes jointly admitted they came out. They're suing each other, and we've seen this happen many times here, okay? It's a patty cake game between two sides. It's supposed to be adversarial. They try to confuse everybody by saying, oh, no, we're suing you, because everybody thinks that's a problem, but then they just enter into basically a contractual settlement agreement, come to terms that are beneficial for both of them, that allows them to do what they can't do by themselves, undermining the law. So they say they jointly admitted that a flaw came out between the Arizona driver's licensing issuance process and a statewide voter registration database. It failed to maintain any indicator for election officials of the original issuance date. So we don't know when they got the license, and the MVD only started checking citizenship at a certain time. So we don't know before or after that time. So then Fontes and the recorder Richer, these two guys who say our elections are incredible, they further admitted this flaw would cause certain registrants to automatically but inaccurately, understood by the voter system, have provided proof of citizenship. Automatically but not accurately. Oh, you're a citizen. And that the Secretary of State worked with the MVD to identify people who registered to vote for the first time since 2005, used the number of their Arizona driver's license as proof of citizenship, and the license number was first issued before October 1996. Okay, so it's like a weird bucket. It's not that important. Before a certain date, they registered using this way after a certain time. It's a lot of people, almost 200,000. According to Secretary Fontes and recorder Richer, as of September 18th, they've identified almost 98,000 registered voters who meet that criteria. It's a lot. We don't know, are they citizens or not? In a press release, Fontes noted that a recent addition of another 118,000 people to the list impacted the number. Originally, it was only 98,000, as we saw. Then 118,000 came out. They said it was the result of including renewed and reinstated licenses in the data. And when they renewed or reinstated, okay, they came after that, but they may also not have shown any citizenship because they just renewed it and reinstated it. So the press release further noted, they said that the Secretary has collected all available data from the MVD, and when able to do so, notified all election officials, sent every recorder voter records, that we could enable saved database verification so the county recorders can begin conducting citizenship verification, engage with the Department of Health and birth certificates. So they're like, okay, we're going to start processing and verifying citizenship of 200,000 people. At the evidentiary hearing at the bench trial, Fontes testified the total number of individuals affected by the system error, 218,000 at trial. He said that the Secretary possesses the initial list of 98,000 registered voters without citizenship proof. However, he denied that they possess the complete list of all 218,000. Wait, you only have one list? Yeah, I don't have the rest of them. He claimed that the press release's reference to the complete list. Wait, I thought you said in your press release you had the full list, so you can tell us who's on that list. He claimed the press release was hasty drafting and unartful language. He said the secretary was not in possession of a list and that no such list of affected voters existed for 118,000 people. Fontes maintained that the MVD never provided him with the list that contains any personal identifiable information of those 118,000 people. So it's the ostrich approach. You just duck your head in the sand. I have no idea what is on the list. Is that a myth? However, Secretary Fontes provided inconsistent testimony on this point, says the judge. Inconsistent testimony. Dishonest. Initially denying that he even possessed a list of the 98,000. Then he changed his testimony after he got back from lunch. No, I don't have that list. You don't? No, I don't think so. Oh, wait, I do. His testimony suggested that he lacked detailed familiarity with the Secretary of State office's efforts with regard to the issue and with regard to the records in possession related to the 218,000. So the judge is like, you're not even looking into this. You don't even know? Fontes also testified that much of the information contained in the database is derived from MVD records and that his office routinely responds and releases copies of the entire database. And as such release is specifically provided. So he's like, well, you already released the whole database and you would agree that the database does contain a field in the database. It's like, think of it like a giant spreadsheet that denotes whether a voter is a federal voter who has failed to maintain proof of citizen. Now, Ms. Hamilton also confirmed this, testifying that her attorneys had used a records request to obtain access to the database and that before, she's like, we've already gotten a request before. They gave us 6.7 million voter records on August 8th, and those records contained information on 42,000 only federal voters. So like, we know they have it. All we're asking for is for them to narrow the subset. And so the judge is saying, wow, okay. So throughout the hearing, the court did not receive any evidence of any threats to federal only voters. They're saying, well, if we release this list to you, people might die. And they're like, what? You already released this other list to us of 6.7 million people, and we already identified 42,000 people who haven't provided proof of citizenship or whatever. So we don't have any evidence that they got threatened. So why would they be threatened if you release this list? And there was no credible evidence, says the judge, of any specific threats at all. The secretary also testified he was not aware of any specific threats to federal only voters because they're just liars looking for excuses. We can't give you this data about how bad our election is, how compromised it is because of voter safety. What? The parties agree that the full voter registration database is a public record and can be legally used to contact voters, so it's our law. Now, the government offered this guy, Professor Robert Pape, as an expert witness. The court found that Professor Pape met the rules as an expert and allowed to offer his expert opinion, but the court only gives minimal weight to him. As detailed, Professor Pape's testimony focused on political violence and political violence trends nationally, no trends in Arizona. He admitted on cross-examination he didn't even research Arizona. He offered little more than speculation, saying that if we release this information, there's gonna be violence or harassment, and he was just going off national statistics. What it sounds like a terrible class to take. The credibility of his testimony is further diminished by what appeared to be gratuitous political bias in his report and his testimony. He's a woke professor. The professor's opinions regarding general political violence focused almost entirely on allegations of past and anticipated prospective violence only related to Trump. When questioned, he failed to offer a credible explanation for a seemingly partisan emphasis on potential violence from only one end of the political spectrum. Outstanding. I can't wait to see who wrote this. Secretary Fontes and Professor Pape also argued producing the list of 218,000 voters would expose those individuals to harassment and violence. However, the only evidence they presented about generalized threats was about elected officials. They failed to identify any threats against any people, and Ms. Hamilton's unrebutted testimony established that EZAZ doesn't condone violence at all, doesn't harass anybody, actually carefully screens its members and volunteers to ensure that anybody who's accessing the list doesn't participate in anything close to that. So then they brought out the woke Professor Pape. He testified that there was a potential of violence against voters who may be misidentified as illegals, especially if the information was publicly released on the internet. But Pape also testified he was unfamiliar with Arizona law and did not realize that Arizona criminalizes releasing the database on the internet. So it's like, hey, that's already illegal. So we're not publishing this stuff online. In fact, Fontes later testified that his office had recently referred an individual to law enforcement for posting voter registration info online that he obtained from their office, right? You get it for your research, but you can't post it online. Don't post the files online. Pape also testified he was unaware that the entire database was not only a public record, but specifically identifies each federal only voter. So it's like, this guy doesn't even know what he's talking about. Now, the professor and Fontes provided provided no evidence that the Republicans had unlawfully released any other database before. There's no evidence that there was any harassment or that EZAZ has organized any Republican efforts. Fontes also indicated that he was unaware of EZAZ submitting any challenges to voter registrations, saying we don't even do that. However, when we do identify ineligible people, we refer them to the recorder's office. That's all. We just look at the list and just refer them over. Hamilton testified they carefully screen all their members. They provide extensive training. She personally posts on social media multiple times per day, but doesn't engage in violence or anything like that. Says that EZAZ would not oppose an order. She says, you can even order us to not distribute it to anybody. That's fine. We're not going to do it anyways. Fine. Whatever you want. Put that in there. Further agreed that we're not going to oppose an order that required them to obtain written assurances. Yeah, we'll even tell them. We'll make them sign a receipt. We promise not to disclose this. Okay, no problem. Like, we'll do anything you want. Just give us the data. We'll protect everybody. No one's going to die, Adrian. Secretary Fontes argued that providing the list would necessarily lead to violence. He says, even death, people are going to die like COVID of one or more affected voters who's identified on the list. Even if this court specifically ordered that the list could only go to recorders and leadership in the legislature and the House. So the judge is saying, this is ridiculous, okay? Adrian Fontes, your claims are not credible, okay? There's no evidence. No one's going to die. Relax. Fontes testified. He says, well, it's my opinion. If the legislature is provided a copy, legislature would undoubtedly give the list to third-party people, and then they would have the specific intent to encourage those groups to engage in violent or harassing behavior, even death or injury. Ridiculous, the judge says, not supported by any credible evidence, not supported by any claims. And so the secretary avowed to the court he'll comply with whatever the ruling is. And so in conclusion, they say, we recognize well-established presumption of disclosing public records. The desire to withhold these records means you have to show why under Arizona law. All of this stuff may only be used for the purposes and they have to be disclosed. And so the court finds specifically that the information that was requested is a public record. It has a substantial nexus to their official duties because it governs the conduct of the election. And so there is no exception for imperfect or unreliable information. Just because your records are garbage and because you make mistakes doesn't mean you can't give this. In fact, that means you should give it. There's an even greater interest in disclosing the stuff so we can see where the problems are. If you want to withhold this, you must show specifically what the harm is. You haven't done that here. During his testimony, Adrian Fontes argued that he would withhold the information if withholding it could save just one life. So dramatic. Well, I can't release this because I'll have to save just one life. What are you talking about? Putting aside the lack of any evidence that anyone's life is in danger anywhere, the court rejects their broad reading of best interest of the state. If this was the case, if you could withhold records because it's in your best interests, then you can do whatever you want. You could withhold any record if you thought it could even save one life, whatever that means. The court would be adopting some broad arbitrary standard. We're not going to do that. Now, although Adrian provided testimony to generalized political threats in the current environment, there was no evidence that EZAZ is going to engage in any of this. In fact, they showed the opposite. You've already given them records and nothing bad has happened to anybody. No one's been implicated with any privacy or any other confidentiality rights. There's no evidence they've ever weaponized this information. There's no evidence they've ever harassed anybody. In fact, the opposite. EZAZ.org provided unrebutted, specific, credible evidence that it carefully vetted, trains members, and is a good steward. And so in summary, there was no credible evidence that the plaintiff, the Republican EZAZ in this case, or its agents will misuse the requested information, will encourage violence or anything of the sort. And privacy records are also not enough. The driver privacy law forbids, the Seventh Circuit says, and so none of that is persuasive to overcome the disclosure, right? Saying your right to personal privacy is not being violated. Saying the secretary has failed to establish that a release of the records would be detrimental to the state. And so it is ordered that Arizona release the list of 98,000 affected voters no later than noon Monday, one day before the election on November 4th. They shall also release any communications with the county recorders that contain data sets, compilations, information lists, and more. Also, the personal identifiable information shall be included in the list. Similarly, all communications and data transmissions between the Secretary of State's office and any of their counterparts. Oh, this is so good. Governor, DOT, MVD, Department of Health, County Recorder, Stephen Richer, County Elections, Arizona Legislature. Get those records by Monday noon, November 4th. Whew, I can't wait to see what comes of this, baby. It's going to be good. Defendants may redact the data sets to prevent the release release of information that you wouldn't ordinarily release. It's further ordered that before November 6th, EZAZ may only distribute this to certain people listed here. Do not release any personal identifiable information, so a bunch of orders, and this is no problem at all. And then prepare and lodge a form of judgment, including attorney's fees. So amazing. So Honorable Scott A. Blaney delivering the news. A great decision. Really nice to see that happen. What a joke of Adrian Fontes and these government bureaucrats. That's what's happening in Arizona. But this problem has been going on for a long time, for a lot longer than even we suspected. Here's a background on what this was and where it came from ABC 15 in Arizona.
And now coming to light on the data coding issues affecting our Arizona voter rolls just before a major presidential election. The ABC 15 investigators found a missed opportunity where these data problems could have been identified and fixed years ago. It's been 6 weeks since Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fontes admitted our voter registration system had a problem.
This isn't a comfortable position to be in by any stretch,
Yeah.
neither for us nor for Arizona's voters.
Days earlier, Maricopa County Recorder Stephen Richer was alerted a non-citizen was a registered voter due to miscoding in the Motor Vehicle Division's driver's license database that affected the electronic voter roll. Turns out an estimated 218,000 people, 5% of all Arizona voters, were marked
5%.
as citizens, even though they may not have provided proof that's been
5% of our voters. And remember, 2020 was about 11,000 votes.
required for the last 2 decades under Prop 200.
The fact that it didn't come to light earlier baffles me a bit.
Ken Bennett is
Well,
a
we know
former
why.
Arizona Secretary of State.
But it never came to our attention that any county had found someone who was registered that wasn't supposed to be. Nothing ever came up between 2009 and 2015 while I was secretary.
Because for you, that would have raised a big red flag, right?
Well, it would have raised the same big red flag that it raised this time.
After Bennett left office, the issue did come to light at least once. In 2016 in Maricopa County, ABC 15 even reported on it, the case of
Wow.
Alan Fagenblatt.
I didn't want to get in trouble. I still don't want to get in trouble.
We initially agreed to protect his identity, but his name became public when he was criminally charged for lying on his voter registration form. He only had a green card, but checked this box saying he was a citizen on the Service Arizona website while providing his real name and driver's license number. He said he never had planned to vote. He just wanted to show that ineligible voters like him could get on the rolls.
You know, you got all these politicians. They've been in politics for many years, and nobody figured this out.
Yeah.
Back then, Maricopa
Good
County
call.
Recorder Helen Purcell said she did not think this could lead to widespread voter fraud.
I think that we check it thoroughly enough that that is not the case.
Purcell's office blamed the Fagenblatt case on an MVD information loophole. 8 years later, the same loophole was discovered again with a new voter by Recorder Stephen Richer. So I asked MVD, why didn't they fix the flaw back in 2016? A spokesperson wrote me that it was allowed due to how the system historically operated based on a decades-old policy. This is that policy
For
that told
years.
MVD how to implement a 1996 law, which required people to provide proof of authorized presence in the U.S., like a passport, visa, or birth certificate, if they were applying for a first-time driver's license or state ID. Then, in 2004, election law changed under Prop 200, saying driver's licenses and IDs issued after that 1996 law took effect could serve as proof of citizenship when registering to vote for the first time. These two laws did not mesh perfectly, but election officials trusted the data that they were getting from MVD would confirm 2 things.
What a
First,
joke.
if someone had confirmed proof of citizenship, and second, they had a driver's license or ID issued after 1996. MVD now tells us the data had the following loopholes. All pre-1996 driver's license holders were also coded as citizens, even though some were not, and MVD coding did not necessarily show the original license issue date, so people could have been coded as a post-1996 license if they ever had a duplicate renewal or reinstatement. MVD says the data flaws have been fixed in the last few weeks.
We've had for 20 years Republican and Democratic governors and secretaries of state and county recorders. They're all had a hand in this, and no one caught.
We talked to Corey Langhofer and other election attorneys who've worked on lawsuits over Arizona's proof of citizenship laws. Well, they also say they didn't know about the data coding issues until now. They do say many checks of voter credentials over the years through multiple investigations have rarely turned up unauthorized voters.
There was no evidence presented in any of the cases that we have, like large numbers or any numbers of non-citizens who are voting in our elections.
Well, they don't have any data. Even Adrian Fontes doesn't even know the names, right? I don't even have the lists. mess. So you can see it's just a joke. And they told us in 2020, remember this, that our elections were totally safe, totally secure, everything's amazing. And in 2022, Carrie Lake lost fair and square, even though there were election problems all over the place. The lists themselves are terrible. They're just filled with people who should not be on them. And we saw this same pattern playing out in Michigan, where she's going to remove a bunch of people after the next 2 election cycles. Thousands and thousands of people. We're talking 5% of the Arizona voters in Arizona. They don't have a clear idea on if they're citizens or not, and they're trying to figure it out, and they just discover it at the last minute when it's too late to do anything about it. Shocking. Really very convenient for them. In Arizona, this case is a good decision. We'll see what the numbers look like, and then we'll see who's on that list and what we can do about it in the aftermath. So thanks for subscribing, my friends. We'll see you back here when this case coverage continues.